Well, today we celebrate Mother's Day. And mothers are wonderful people. But the qualities we associate with mothers need not be exclusively confined to biological mothers. Those wonderful qualities that we expect to find in a mother, the love, the compassion, the support, the protective sense that we get when in the mother's presence, they need not exclusively belong to the mother in the female sense. They may belong to the man as well. In fact, every good man has within him surely some motherly feeling. This was brought home to me very powerfully indeed. A few years ago when I was in a Unity church in another part of the country, and a couple of members of the congregation, men, wanted to adopt 2 children. And I was called upon to go before a judge in family court and to affirm that they would make good fathers and good mothers. And I believed they could. They had within them all the necessary qualities that we would expect to find, that we celebrate in the mother. I'm always enormously impressed by that maternal instinct. I have 2 children. My wife has brought up those children with my help, or you could say I brought them up with her help, depending on which way you look at it. There's an old saw that says the question is not, is there life after death, but is there life after children? And the answer is no, in one of those instances anyway. We always feel responsible for our children. It's true that that maternal instinct is strong and profound and admirable, but it's found in the other gender as well. I was telling the story earlier this morning of the time when I was a prison chaplain, and I visited a grim prison called Leavenworth in Kansas. Leavenworth at that time had a reputation second only to Rikers Island, I think, as the worst jail in the country. It was an appalling place. Just to get into it took about half an hour. And I was working with a chaplain in Unity, as a matter of fact, who at that time was Chaplain Post, who was visiting prisoners on death row. And it always amazed me that these men, many of whom were classified as monsters, these men always had one visitor waiting for them. And guess who that was? It was Mom. Their mother was there. The mother always has that belief in her child. She always reaches out to comfort and to sustain and to give compassion when that child is in need. But that isn't an ability, a capacity to give confined to the biological mother. That capacity can be found in every compassionate human being, male or female, or even if there's one with a couple of horns on her head. That instinctive love for the offspring, the need to nurture and support, it's there. And what has impressed me over the years, too, to an extraordinary degree, is that the capacity that mothers have to love is a great capacity to give. Mothers of whatever gender are givers. They are caregivers. That's one of the distinctive factors that we look for in motherliness, whether it's in human beings or some other species. We always celebrate that care, that compassion, that support. It's so beautiful, it's so touching, it's so deeply moving when we see it, and indeed when we experience it in ourselves. It's an extraordinary capacity, but I have observed that people who give of themselves in this way are very often incapable of receiving. I've known people who have given and given and given and given as mothers give, and yet they don't receive in return. In Unity, we have a magnificent teaching, perhaps one of the most beautiful teachings that our founders ever propounded, and that is the notion of giving and receiving. If one gives, one looks to receive. And yet one of the great tragedies that we encounter in life, in our Western world at least, among those of the Christian persuasion, is that very often the idea of receiving is discounted. We don't think we're worthy to receive. We're told that giving is admirable. What have I just done for the last 10 minutes? But tell you how admirable the notion of giving is. How moving, how touching, how extraordinary, how wonderful it is. But what about receiving? Shouldn't those who give of their hearts, deeply of their emotions, should they not also expect to receive? And yet so often these wonderful people don't. I've known individuals who've been carers all their lives, mothers all their lives, male or female, and they've never been able really to receive in return. Because sometimes they haven't felt worthy, or they've been brought up traditionally to believe that we have no right to expect any return. I've known people who've said all their lives, I'm not worthy to receive. Why is this? Why in our Western tradition, why in the predominant Christian tradition, has it been customary, fashionable, indeed, at times, to believe that to receive is in some sense questionable, spiritually, even morally? Why? Why, I ask myself. And I think the answer lies in an understanding of the roots of Christianity itself. Jesus, the great master teacher, he says in Matthew, in very beautiful words, he says, freely ye received, freely give. He makes the whole business of giving and receiving axiomatic, two sides of one coin. He makes giving and receiving almost an equation that we can understand and practice. There is no moral distinction between the giver and the receiver. One is not more holy than the other. In Jesus' definition, it is the Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. He says, ask and ye shall receive. He doesn't say, ask, and if you're well behaved, and if God's in a good mood, you might receive, but you might not. It's up to you, naughty, naughty. He doesn't say that at all. To him, giving and receiving are parts of a spiritual process. A beautiful, an amazing, an astounding, sometimes even a stupefying process. So beautiful that it's hard sometimes to contemplate. And yet, what have we been brought up to believe? We have been brought up to believe sometimes what the founder of Christianity, and you say Jesus, and I say no, the Apostle Paul, the self-appointed apostle, incidentally, the Apostle Paul said. He said, as recorded in the 20th chapter of the book of the Acts of the Apostles, he said, Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Jesus didn't say that. Why do you think Paul said it? Why do you think Paul said it? Because he's building a church. Am I not derelict in my duty if I do not tell you this morning, folks, it is certainly more blessed to give to this institution than to receive from it? But I'm not going to tell you that because I don't believe it. Giving and receiving are equally balanced. And yet we have been brought up in a tradition that tells us that it is indubitably more blessed to give than to receive. When I was a youngster growing up, I was told by my betters and seniors that if I wanted to live life properly, I'm not sure what that meant, but if I were to live life properly, I would always make sure that I was in the position of the giver rather than the receiver. There was something reprehensible about receiving. Even love, can you imagine? Everything was quantified because we live in a material society, so everything is quantified. Even love, passion, emotion, all of these things, joy, art, the aesthetic, everything is quantified. Everything has upon it a value of that sort. And so, of course, I was told, you must always be sure that you are in the position of the giver, because the giver is in a morally superior position. The giver has control. The giver has power over you. The giver has power. The person who gives to you has power over you, morally, emotionally, even legally. Some years ago, my wife and I had a church in South Carolina, in Greenville, South Carolina. And there's a fine university in that town, Bob Jones University. It's a Christian university, very strict university. I've no problem with the university. It's academically a fine school. But they have what they say is the finest collection. I don't wish to misquote them, and forgive me if I have. They say they have the finest collection of religious art in the world. A rather extravagant boast, I would think, especially having gone through it several times. There are rooms filled with great Christian art, it's true. Most of it copied from the great masters, it's true. But one thing that always impressed me when I went through that museum, and continues to impress me when I recollect that experience, and that is that so many of the pictures that were on display and that I saw portrayed givers and supplicants, givers of some gift, on horses very often, because these are old pictures, sometimes on thrones, and the supplicant is on bended knee. I did it. Now I've got to get up, right? Thank you very much. The supplicant is always on bended knee, or certainly in an inferior position. The giver is always in the superior position, and the receiver is always in the inferior position. And I don't care what realm or domain of human experience you want to describe, spiritual, emotional, physical, sexual. The point is that there's this distinction between the one who gives and the one who receives. But it's a false distinction. It's a false distinction, friends. Giving and receiving are equal sides of a coin, as our Fillmore friends knew and understood. It's taken me a long time, myself, to feel more comfortable as a receiver. For heaven's sake, when somebody comes here this morning and gives me my cup of coffee, I say, oh no, No, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done that. Oh, I'm not worthy of I'm the minister, for heaven's sake, but never mind. We have certain prerogatives. I can't remember what they are, but we certainly have. Maybe having a cup of coffee on Sunday morning is one of them. But anyway, somebody gives me a cup of coffee gratis. I didn't ask for it. They come and give it to me. Where's the guy who gives me my cup of coffee? Is he here? He went home at the second service. Bless his beloved heart. He gives me a cup of coffee. And I'm saying, oh, no. Hypocrite! I'm delighted that he gave me a cup of coffee. Absolutely delighted. But that little trigger goes off in my mind. I'm receiving. I'm not worthy to receive. I have a friend who spent several years in a monastery. And he was taught there that he was nothing, that he was absolutely nothing in the sight of God, that he was not worthy to receive anything. And he found the love of a good woman eventually, and he left that church and he married. And praise God, he received that love given to him openly. And he wanted that love, but this conditioning prevented him from accepting it. Giving and receiving are part of a process. They are, as it were, part of an axiomatic process. It is true that when we give, we initiate a cycle, and we then have to be open to the return. Now, you may say, well, that's pretty cold-blooded. I'm going to write a check for $15 to the church now. Make it, add a zero if you want, but I'm going to make a check to the church, and I'm going to look for the return right now. That's not the way it works. It's not that blatant, folks. Come on. Spiritual matters, these beautiful, beautiful spiritual issues, are more subtle than that. But they work nevertheless. When we give, when we open our hearts in the act of giving, when we speak a kind word, when we reach out and help somebody, when we smile at somebody, if you want to write a check, that's fine too. But when you give, you initiate a cycle of giving and receiving. The good is there, the abundant good is there. And if you don't claim it, it's not going to come. It's not going to come. We have to be open and receptive to our good. This is what our founders taught. This is what Jesus taught. This is what Paul kind of, after 2,000 years, I hate to disparage the guy because he isn't here to defend himself, but I know what he was up to. He was building a church. So he said it's more blessed to give than to receive. No, giving and receiving are part and parcel of the same beautiful spiritual process that we experience in our lives. I'm not talking politics, folks. I'm not talking about whether you're on welfare or anything of that sort. That's different. That's another matter. I'm talking spiritually here. One of the most beautiful, one of the most touching, one of the most effective spiritual principles that we can ever appreciate and practice is the notion of giving and receiving in our lives. When we give, of what we have to give. You may say, I don't have much to give. Yes, you do. You have yourself to give, and you are unique. All of us, each one of us has something to give. And when we give that freely and openly, a smile, a handshake, anything, doesn't matter, then we need to look legitimately for the return. I don't know how the return's going to come. I don't care. And neither should you. Because the return is there and it's coming, and if you look for it and if you are ready to accept it, it shall manifest itself in your life. One of the most beautiful secrets, as I say, of our spiritual search is the mastery of this understanding of the simple principle of giving and receiving. As we give, so shall we receive. It's not a question of working it out mathematically, folks. It happens. It happens. It happens in joy and love and satisfaction and fulfillment and in anything else you wish to denominate. But it happens. I'm finished.